With the success of Minecraft came a tsunami of pixelated games with block-style environments. While many attempted to simply clone Minecraft, hoping to get a slice of the pie, others were trying to be at least a little bit more creative. And one such game to attempt creativity is Block Survival Legend of the Lost Islands. Block Survival Legend of the Lost Islands is an FPS survival game developed and published by Battle Blockyverse Studios, formerly known as Interpixel. The game released on Steam July 14, 2017. Block Survival combines old school FPS action with the weapon crafting and survival mechanics of Minecraft reasonably well, but suffers from bugs, haphazard level design, imbalanced gameplay and poor enemy AI, leading to boring combat. You take on the role of a nameless male character. While on a flight to an unknown destination, the plane suddenly starts to go down, crashing on a series of mysterious islands below. After waking from the incident, you need to set out and look for a way to get off the islands, while surviving the many dangers that stand in your way. It isn't long before a mysterious dark being begins to show up, taunting you and bemusing itself with your struggles. Who is this mysterious figure? What caused the plane to crash on these islands? Where exactly are you? The only way to find the answers to these questions is to make your way through the many islands and survive. The plot to Block Survival is alright. It takes a more old school FPS approach to its pacing and writing, where the plot only progresses at the beginning and end of each chapter of the game and is presented as a comic book. Its pacing isn't too bad, but it is a bit inconsistent at times, taking longer than others before you get to the next part of the plot. But it does do well with keeping the mysterious figure exactly that, while slowly revealing who and what it is the closer you get to the end. As is the nature of old school inspired FPS titles, the plot does take the back seat while the gameplay is the main focus of the game. It does the job it is intended to, and that is to create a setting and a reason for the protagonist to be there. The plot isn't all that original, having been done plenty of times before. The TV series Lost is the first thing that comes to mind. It isn't all that interesting either, so if you're playing for a good and intriguing plot, you aren't going to find it. But if looking for action-packed gameplay with basic survival mechanics is what you are looking for, then this may be what you wanted. Your objective in the game is to reach the end of each level and killing the boss to open the portal to the next island, eventually reaching and facing off against the main villain at the end of the game in order to be rescued. The gameplay to Block Survival consists of three main core elements, that being the FPS combat, resource collecting and crafting, along with two secondary elements, that being RPG and survival. Despite the game's name, the survival element of the game is so minor you can't really include it as a core component, but I will get to that shortly. Let's start with the resource collecting. Throughout each level you will find various trees, piles of stone and the likes that you need to harvest by hitting with a melee weapon or your fists. These generally take about 3 hits before breaking and being able to collect the materials. It is very similar to that of Minecraft in that each unique tree and rock type grants a different material, with the rarer of them being less common. Some materials in the game can only be obtained from chests or very occasionally from certain enemies. This is especially the case for the rarest of the materials. The resource collecting in the game works well, but it desperately slows down the overall gameplay. You spend a good 30% of your game time hacking down trees and beating the crap out of piles of rock. At first it isn't so bad, but once you get past the quarter mark it starts to become grating. Along with the harvesting of materials, you will also need to collect food that is obtained from specific animal enemies and found laying around throughout the levels. The food is required to fill your hunger, that is displayed using drumsticks on the top right of the main HUD that sits at the bottom of the screen. If all the drumsticks turn to bone, it means you are starving and are unable to run or jump as high as normal. Along with that, food is also used to restore small amounts of your health, and is the primary source of healing for a majority of the game. Having the hunger mechanic is about as survival as the game gets. There is no real danger to starving, as it doesn't affect your health or hinder you in any other way than slowing you down a bit. The issue with the mechanic, more than anything, is that food is in such abundance that you never run into the difficulty of your hunger gauge depleting. The only time you might find your food supplies running low is if you rush through the game, but even then, it is never really a problem. It just results in the mechanic being pointless and only implemented for the sake of familiarity and the Minecraft look, and it makes the whole name of the game, Block Survival, meaningless, as there isn't really any actual survival to it. But aside from that, the collecting of materials and food works well for the most part, but again slows down the overall gameplay a bit too much. The final aspect of the survival elements of the game, if you can call them that, is like with Minecraft, come nightfall monsters begin to appear. These monsters act as an additional threat on top of what enemies are already in each of the levels. These, what I can only describe as gremlins, continue to spawn in close proximity of the player from dusk until dawn. They are relatively weak and don't pose much of a threat throughout the entire game. They don't really add anything to the survival elements and are really only there as another nod to the Minecraft inspiration. Then there is the crafting of the game. How this works is that in order to craft a weapon you need to first obtain the recipe. These recipes can be found in chests scattered throughout each level, generally in a relatively plain sight. As to what recipe you get is entirely random, and it is possible to find duplicates. Having the recipes randomly generated in each chest grants the game an element of surprise, but it does cause the issue of getting weapon recipes that can't be used for ages due to the rare late game material requirements. Along with that, I believe the duplicate recipes is a bug over it actually being an intended feature. The reason for this is when you get the supposed duplicate recipe, a prompt still appears saying you obtained a new one, but when you check the crafting menu, no new recipe has unlocked. So I do believe this is one of the many bugs present in the game. The recipe system works, but it can be very frustrating at times, especially when you get the supposed duplicate recipes or when you find one that you simply can't use until late game. Another problem with it is that a lot of the weapons that could be of use to you early in the game sometimes don't unlock until late and end up being useless to you then. It is definitely one of those mechanics that has more negatives to it than positives. As for the crafting itself, it is pretty straightforward. You click on the recipe and it tells you what materials are needed in order to make the item, be it weapon, armor or medkit. Assuming you have the materials, you can simply place them into the squares in the crafting screen and craft. It is pretty simple stuff and its functionality at its core works perfectly. The biggest issue with the crafting is that when making the likes of medkits, you can only craft one at a time. So if you wanted to make say 10 of them, you will have to repeat the process over and over again, one by one. Along with that, there is no way of crafting ammunition, which is a big problem early in the game. Even attempting to craft the same weapon a second time, it won't grant you any more ammo. I thought that was nonsensical considering when you first craft a gun, it gives you ammo and results in you having to resort to melee combat most of the time early in the game. The crafting system of block survival is simple to use and easy to come to grips with, but it certainly has its issues. For those experienced in Minecraft's crafting, you will definitely be disappointed, as it offers nothing close to it. But if it is simple yet somewhat effective crafting mechanics that you are looking for, Block Survival will provide it. Then there is the combat of the game. This works in similar fashion to pretty much any old school FPS game. You need to traverse each level, killing anything that moves in the process, using either melee or ranged weaponry. The melee combat works pretty well, it is responsive, and there was never a point where the hit detection was going wonky on me while hitting enemies feeling impacting. But the ranged combat is a whole different story. When shooting with ranged weapons, the hit detection is extremely temperamental. There are often times I shot at an enemy and it should have been a direct hit, but instead the bullet goes straight through and doesn't do any damage at all. This is especially the case when attempting to get headshots. If you are anywhere close to the edge of an enemy model, the hit detection won't kick in. It leads to some real bullshit and frustrating moments, especially when sniping. As if that isn't bad enough, the enemy AI is about as basic as it gets in an FPS game. The enemy's line of sight and detection is minuscule, often only activating to the player's presence within about 15 or 20 feet, if that. It results in you being able to kill enemies from a distance before they even know you're there. Making noise and shooting in their close proximity doesn't affect their ability to detect you in any shape or form either. Along with that, they are extremely slow at fighting you, often taking several seconds before lining up their shots and firing, giving you plenty of time to react and kill them before they get a chance. There is no tactics to the enemies. They either stand at a set distance away from you and shoot or charge towards you in a straight line. It is enemy AI at its most basic level, and something that you will find on an FPS for mobile devices as opposed to that of a PC game. The closest thing to complex enemies is the Vikings in about the 4th level. With these you need to shoot off their armour before being able to deal damage to the enemies themselves, but that is about as varied and exciting as they get. Having such a basic AI doesn't make for compelling FPS gameplay, as enemies are too predictable and easy targets. It just makes the combat repetitive, boring, unchallenging and lacking in every regard. But with that said, the combat does have its moments when expectations are extremely low. When you have a ton of ammunition and using the likes of a submachine gun, AK or an Uzi, and you're just filling tons of enemies full of lead, you do get moments of exhilaration. But that is more due to the lack of excitement in every other regard with the game than the combat being actually good. When you kill enemies, they drop small yellow squares that act as your currency in the game. These are used to purchase weapon upgrades, armour, medkits, recipes and materials at the shops scarcely scattered throughout the levels. The weapon upgrades work like that of a slot machine. You pay a specific amount of money for the upgrade, with the price increasing each time, and then the upgrade names begin to rotate. You need to click stop for the rotation to halt, and then what upgrade it stops on is what you get. These upgrades include extended clip, increased damage, increased rate of fire and so on. Each weapon can be upgraded 5 times in total. Having the shops is a nice little addition that allows you to stock up on ammo, buy materials that are a bit harder to find through harvesting, and of course, making your weapons more powerful. They're always a welcoming sight to see when you come across them. The problem with the shops is that they're really buggy. For starters, sometimes when you buy a recipe from a shop, it won't unlock. Another bug is that of buying ammo. Every gun in the game has a limit as to how much ammo it can carry. The thing is, when you pick up ammo dropped by enemies, you can exceed that limit. When you are past that limit and you buy ammo for the weapon, the shop will take your money and actually lower your ammo to the weapon's limit. So essentially you're paying the shop to take away your ammunition, which brings up the question of why have an ammo limit if you can exceed it by picking up ammo from enemies. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense and always leaves a feeling of detachment from the game. But aside from those issues, they work well, and the randomness of the weapon upgrades are a good touch that adds a bit of excitement. Along with that, ammo pickups apply to all weapons, meaning when you pick up ammo, it will always be for the weapon you are holding at that moment. The amount you get from an ammo pickup or a weapon is determined by its clip size. So for example, weapons with a 30 round clip will always get 30 rounds of ammo, while a 50 round will get 50 bullets, and so on and so forth. Having the whole one ammo fits all weapons just doesn't work from a challenge perspective. You're always going to switch to your most powerful weapon when picking up ammo, and it just makes you overpowered, resulting in no sense of survival in the game. While on the topic of problems, all weapons in the game have no statistics. This may not sound too much of a problem, but the damage rate of fire, recoil and ammo limits vary greatly from gun to gun. Without the statistics, there is no way of telling how much damage a weapon is going to do, or how fast it fires, and so on. It results in you having to craft a weapon and use it to find out what it's like, ultimately wasting materials if it turns out it is weaker than what you are already using. It just adds more fuel to the flames of frustration that the game provides, and is a real oversight by the developer. Another problem with the weapons, especially the guns, is that they are woefully unbalanced. By far the Uzi is one of, if not the most powerful gun, and is one of the earliest firearms in the game. It deals a good amount of damage, along with having super fast rate of fire and high clip size. So once you have the Uzi, it becomes your only firearm, with the exception of a sniper for long range shooting, as no other weapons deal the same damage per second as it does. It results in the likes of the AK-47 and other assault rifles being completely useless, when realistically they should be more powerful based on raw damage compared to that of an Uzi, and it's just disappointing. And if I'm to be honest, there is no excuse for it, especially since the game released over a year ago and this unbalancing still exists. The last mechanic to talk about is that of the RPG elements. Much like the survival elements of the game, they are very minor. Basically, the RPG elements consist of a level up system. You gain experience by defeating enemies and collecting resources by destroying trees and rock piles. Each time you level up, you gain a bonus. These bonuses come in the form of more health, stamina, faster movement speed and so on. You have no control over the bonuses you get with each level up, which is a shame. Having the choice of leveling up your character how you want to would have been a much better choice, as it would allow for different playstyles, but that isn't the case here. It's a level up system at its most basic. It does the job it is intended to, but it doesn't add to the game in any way, and becomes almost invisible to the player. And due to the poor AI and the lack of challenge in the game, there was never a point where I felt I even needed the bonuses. There was no determination or goals to actually work towards leveling up. There's also a bug in the experience system where certain enemies, particularly large size ones, where you gain experience points numerous times. Basically what this means is you are killing only one enemy, but you're gaining experience as if you've killed 4 or 5. While it is a bug that works in the player's favour, it still presents yet again the poor level of polish that Block Survival has. The final kick in the bollocks with Block Survival was to find that the New Game Plus, one of the big selling points on the store page, doesn't work for some people. It is random as to who it happens to, and there doesn't appear to be any rhyme or reason for it. When I contacted the developer in relation to this issue, due to it being a big one, their response was that they couldn't reproduce it and that they weren't going to look further into it at present due to working on the multiplayer for the game. To say I was annoyed with the response would be an understatement, and all I have to say is, fix the fucking problems in your game before adding new shit in. If you want people to play the new content, sort the problems they are experiencing first. It is the people playing your game that will convince others to buy it. It's common fucking sense. Overall, the gameplay to Block Survival misses a lot more than it hits. There are a lot of bugs that have not been ironed out that should have been easy fixes. There are certain elements that should be implemented but are not, such as weapon statistics and character development, and the AI needs a major overhaul to make the combat anything close to exciting. And let's not forget the ton of balancing that needs to be done too. Block Survival is about as far away from survival as it gets. Its crafting is functional but requires a lot of balancing and reworking from an interface standpoint. The gathering of resources works fine but slows down the game a bit too much. Block Survival is a better game when it is doing what it should be, that being an old school FPS rather than a dumbed down action orientated Minecraft. When I played it as an FPS game, I had some fun with it, but when playing the game as it was designed to be played, it was nothing more than tiresome. The level design of Block Survival is a lot like its gameplay. It is a real roller coaster of quality. Throughout the game you're going to find levels that are pretty good, and then you're going to find those that are bloody awful. A great example of the level design when it is good is the second level, which is also featured in the demo of the game. Here you need to explore each of the small islands, making your way to the main one where you need to kill the boss to open the portal to the next level. There was a sense of freedom to the level while also being easy to navigate. But then you get levels that are just uninspired and act more like mazes and literal gauntlets than anything really creative or interesting. An example of a horrible situation was right at the end of a level when you come across an instant death gauntlet run, where the crushing pillars kill you instantly. If you die in that gauntlet, you need to start from the beginning of the boss fight again. While in Block Survival the bosses are not too much of a challenge, it is still woefully bad level design. It doesn't take a genius to tell you there should always be a checkpoint after completion of a boss fight if the level continues afterwards. Having to do it all over again is just horseshit. So yes, just like a lot of other aspects of the game, the levels have the occasional good and fluent design, but then it also has its really bad ones. Having such a roller coaster of good and bad design results in some levels being enjoyable and others that just drag on and on. Another issue with the level design is that it has no consistency with the theme, both in environmental and with enemy design. For an example of level themes, one minute you are on a tribe island, next you are making your way through Block Survival's version of Jurassic Park, and then you end up in an Asian themed location with ninjas. A game needs to have varied level design. I would be one of the first people to criticize a game for not having it. But you can have a variety of different level environments while sticking with a theme, and Block Survival doesn't do that. Instead it is just moving from one theme to another without there being any reason for it other than it is what it is. A perfect example of a game that did theme change well would be Serious Sam 2, where the moving from world to world was a part of the plot. There was an explanation for it. Here you get no reason whatsoever, it's just bad design. Along with the jumbled up level design, the enemy placement is also just as bizarre. You have levels that have modern military and swashbuckling pirates in the same area fighting alongside each other in an Aztec building. It makes no sense. These people probably wouldn't even be able to speak the same language, let alone make an alliance and work together to stop you. I don't mind games being silly if that is what they set out to do, but this is supposed to be a survival game. You can't have silly, illogical things happening where you are supposed to be struggling for your life. It just ruins the absorption that the game is attempting to bring. I think it's safe to say that the level design of Block Survival is the same as that of the gameplay. A convoluted mess that can't tell the difference between its arse and elbow. There are times it does get things right, but more often than not the level design doesn't work from the perspective of tone, both environmentally and with the characters it presents. And without there being some sort of explanation for the chaos and illogical design, it just comes across as poor and rushed work. The atmosphere of Block Survival is a lot like many other aspects of the game. Hit and miss. There are times where perfect ambience and music tracks play in the background to give the game a dreamlike quality to it, such as the main menu theme. Another example of the well done atmosphere is in the first level where you're fighting against Aztec-like enemies. The slow and rather low music track fits in perfectly with the environments and enemies. It consists of a slow tribe thumping sound and beats, and it works splendidly well. But then there are moments in the game where they could play that exact same Aztec atmosphere track in a level that has nothing fitting with that theme, or in another instance where a track will suddenly have a very techno vibe to it despite the environment having nothing fitting to that of techno. It is like a lot of the entirety of the game's design. The atmosphere is at times well done, and other times it is mashed together into some abomination where everything is just out of place. It is such a shame that this is the case, as when the atmosphere is good, it really absorbs you into the game despite its many problems. But when it's bad, it makes everything look all the worse. Block Survival is one of those games that outright annoys me, but not for the reasons you might think. The biggest and most frustrating issue the game has isn't that it is a mess, but rather the fact that it has the potential, but there just isn't any passion or genuine love put into it. Based on the developers' response to the issue with the new game plus, along with the game still having outstanding problems, it is pretty clear they don't really know what they're doing. Either that or their priorities are just arseways. It's one of those games that is painful to review, because in the right hands, this could have been a really good and creative game that took the old school FPS genre in a different direction. But nothing is being done except the addition of multiplayer to a game that's interest is long gone of what there was to begin with. At the end of the day, Block Survival has an okay plot, but its gameplay, while at times fun, is lacking. The crafting is basic, and a lot more could have been done to integrate it in a more impacting way to the gameplay. The collecting of materials could have been more interesting and faster paced. The level design is all over the place, as is the atmosphere. Overall, Block Survival has a lot more negatives than it has positives. Sure, it can be a fun game at times, but only when you play it as an FPS while ignoring the resource collecting and crafting, and that is impossible at the early stages of the game. And with that, I give Block Survival a 3 out of 10. Block Survival is a perfect example of a game where the developer tried to do a lot of different things while never doing any of it particularly well. It is a game that would have benefited from fewer features and for those elements that worked to be better fleshed out. And while I won't get my hopes up, I would like to be surprised and see this game reach its full potential at some point in the future.